In one of America's most beautiful cities, the famously gritty Tenderloin district in San Francisco is long known best for its trendy restaurants and culture, but now showing a darker side.
Just tell me what you've seen.
I've lived in every neighborhood here, and I come here and it wasn't even safe for me to walk a pit bull.
What distinguishes the Tenderloin is the toleration for massive open-air drug dealing.
We walk the troubled streets where an abundance of drugs and absence of police has put a paid army of ex-cons to work to fix what the city cannot.
Education in America is undergoing a not-so-quiet revolution.
Every parent has the fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children, their medical care, their health care, their education. We do not co-parent with the government.
This week, we talk with a group called Moms for Liberty and the parental activism that's questioning what's being taught to children beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic.
And we go north to the dangerous waters bordering Russia.
I would say operating in the Bering Sea is probably some of the toughest duty a Coast Guardsman can get.
To hear tales of a storied ship and the roots behind the bulldog of the Bering.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. With crime a persistent and growing concern for many Americans, one city that's frequently in the headlines is San Francisco. As homelessness has spiraled out of control, drug crime has gotten so bad in one historic section of town, the mayor declared a state of emergency to try to get a grip on it. Today on our cover story, we pay a visit to the troubled San Francisco neighborhood known as the Tenderloin.
Catherine Vaughn is a native San Franciscan.
Teach you be good. Good girl.
Once homeless, she's now among the low-income residents living in an apartment partly paid for by the government in the city's Tenderloin district.
It's really gone downhill.
Just tell me what you've seen.
I've lived in every neighborhood here, and I come here and it wasn't even safe for me to walk a pit bull. One of the what we consider most dangerous dogs in the world. Yeah, I felt scared to walk her. Constant garbage in the streets, people laying around on the front of the building shooting up, people passed out on the streets.
A short walk from City Hall, the famously gritty Tenderloin district in San Francisco was long known best for its trendy restaurants, jazz clubs, art, and historic theaters. Today, it's become infamous as an open-air market for drug dealers and users. A neighborhood so rough that our drive-by after dusk drew a violent response.
Go!
What was that? What was that?
I don't know. Go!
A chunk of wood hurled through the rear window of our van.
There were already dicey areas of the Tenderloin district, but by most accounts it was during COVID and a change in mayors that there was an explosion of drug dealing that seems to many to be tolerated by nearly every authority. And you're saying the tone of the neighborhood changes a lot right now?
It changes radically when you get to Eddy and Hyde, because the next block is the worst block of the neighborhood. You have 50 to 100 drug dealers doing business every single day, and rarely, if ever, does a police officer show up.
Talking about right up this street.
1 block from where
Randy
we are.
Shaw heads up the Tenderloin Housing Clinic, which advocates for residents in low-income housing. The way he sees it, a current hyper-focus on the homeless is a diversion from the real issue.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
If you eliminate drug dealers in the Tenderloin, we would be fine. You wouldn't have to do anything else. That is 90% of the problem. But people have a need, for whatever reason, talk about homelessness, people with mental health problems. They're all over San Francisco. What distinguishes the Tenderloin is the toleration for massive open-air drug dealing.
When did this change? When did it become a problem of something greater than what you would normally see in San Francisco?
It really started changing in 2019, and then it really got bad during the pandemic. People always say, well, the Tenderloin's had a long history of vice. Yes, it has. But the worst it was in the 80s and 90s is nowhere comparable to how bad it's gotten.
Things are so bad, a major sub-economy is formed, starting with San Francisco shelling out more than $1 billion over the last 2 years on homelessness. At this safe sleeping village, where we weren't allowed in, the city was reported to be paying an incredible $60,000 per tent per year, twice the rent of a typical one-bedroom apartment.
And those tents, everyone says, oh, weren't those tents for homeless people? They're dealing drugs out of the tents. Because if you can have a drug deal in a tent, the police can't see you.
Millions more taxpayer funds go to a nonprofit social program called Urban Alchemy. Their workers, mostly ex-cons, line the streets of the Tenderloin district wearing uniforms marked with fluorescent yellow stripes. They're tasked with peacefully turning around tough neighborhoods by cleaning them up, having conversations, and providing support.
So our Urban Alchemy is to clean up all these blocks from 7 to 7. We need the police to come in other hours, and they've just been nowhere to be found. And you're here right now. Do you see any police?
In all the hours we spent in the Tenderloin, we didn't see one uniformed police officer along the most notorious strip, on foot or in a patrol car. We did see people lined up to use drugs in broad daylight, and lots of drug dealers doing business with no fear of being stopped.
What's your best guess as to why that's not being done?
I think ultimately it comes down to City Hall accepting the Tenderloin as a containment zone and feeling like, I'm really afraid I'll go to another neighborhood. But they don't want to say that publicly because it sounds like they're not caring about low-income families. But how else do you explain it? And here's the kicker. We sent 40 to 80 officers to Union Square after the Louis Vuitton handbags were stolen on a video.
Caught in 4K. Oh, but he's caught in 4K. He's got 2 masks.
I mean, we're essentially vacant stores. It was, it wasn't even people. It was our families. No one lives, it was businesses. So what does that tell you about what the city's priorities really are? It's very sad because San Francisco called itself a progressive city. It says we care about working people, we care about low-income people. Well, then why are families and kids having to walk through drug dealers?
The kids, they get formal escorts to get home safely after school. The escorts are organized with help from the Tenderloin Community Benefit District, where Elise Gorberg works. This year, her group successfully pressured San Francisco to declare a 90-day state of emergency in the Tenderloin with an intense focus on cleaning it up.
One of the reasons we wanted this state of emergency is because we want to have, the kids in the neighborhood feel safe walking to and from school.
During our visit, the Tenderloin's 3-month-long state of emergency was coming to an end. San Francisco Mayor London Breed declined our interview request and didn't answer our questions about lack of police action and whether the drug zone is tolerated. As to accomplishments, a spokesman told us the state of emergency identified focus areas, including drug dealing and violent crime, public substance abuse, and linking people in crisis to care and support services, safe passage and accessibility, neighborhood cleanliness, housing resources, emergency medical calls, and illegal vending.
I think there are definitely areas in the neighborhood where we have seen some improvement, but I think what we're really concerned about is seeing what will happen after this sort of 3-month period that we've been in.
The mayor declared a 90-day state of emergency. What's your understanding of what she hoped to accomplish during the 90 days, and what have you seen?
Well, the state of emergency was supposed to involve a police crackdown on drug dealers. That has never happened. The bottom line is that San Francisco always has had the resources and the staffing to stop drug dealing, except it allows it in the Tenderloin.
As many American cities struggle with waves of homelessness, mental illness, crime, and drugs, residents of the Tenderloin are left to draw their own conclusions as to why things continue to be so bad.
They're using this as a containment zone so that they don't spread out to other areas.
You're saying they accept the drugs dealing in
Absolutely.
a small part of town?
Absolutely. They accept it. They figure don't touch it because they might move to, another area where they definitely don't want it. I mean, it breaks my heart to watch this stuff.
Right now, Urban Alchemy reportedly has about 20 contracts in California worth $50 million to try to improve rough neighborhoods. That's expected to expand to $100 million over the next couple of years, employing 1,500 ex-prison inmates. When we return, moms taking the wheel in their children's education. There's been an upheaval in education during the past 2 years of the COVID pandemic. Part of the change has pressed parents into increased involvement, even activism. Lisa Fletcher reports on One Movement.
A great awakening is usually preceded by a rude awakening.
From protests to disrupted school board meetings, many parents angry and increasingly willing to speak out.
If this continues, we will look back and be responsible for the dismantling of the greatest country in the world by reverting to teaching hate and that race is a determining factor on where your destiny lies.
Across racial, social, and economic lines, a common thread unites these parents. Though spread across the nation, they are part of an organization called Moms for Liberty that's taking the lead in parent activism over what, if anything, children should be taught in schools beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic.
South Dakota would be a new state if that were.
Tina Diskovich and Tiffany Justice lead the movement that, in just under a year and a half, has grown to 80,000 members in 34 states.
What triggered Moms for Liberty?
We both served as school board members, and we saw behind the education curtain. And then COVID happened, and all of America saw behind the education curtain. We're about parental rights. Every parent has the fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children, their medical care, their health care, their education. We do not co-parent with the government. And we have seen over the past 2 years that the government is trying to raise our kids for us.
We saw the imbalance of power that was happening in education, even here in Florida. Teachers' unions, bureaucrats, all taking control of decisions, multiple decisions, not just teacher salary like most people think, but things like when school starts and stops, when school's going to be opened and closed.
You guys had a Facebook post, I believe, that said when we said we wanted you to teach our kids division, we meant math.
Yeah. 100%, absolutely. We are seeing our children divided in America's public school classrooms. We want our children to be united together. We want to unfold the full potential of every child in that classroom, and it's going to take every parent and concerned community member to make sure that happens.
We saw parent groups and mom groups popping up around the country, all on different issues. And what we saw is they didn't know how to advocate. They didn't even understand the structure of who has power within the school district. And so when we stepped up and filled the role of just helping them understand, they're doing the work, we're just providing the structure. So we do not co-parent with the government.
But their critics, there are plenty, say groups like Moms for Liberty are pushing a specific conservative agenda, pointing to recent confrontations over critical race theory and remote learning.
When you see the name Moms for Liberty, I think people think of a conservative Republican organization and probably immediately connect that to something like critical race theory.
I never knew that liberty was a partisan issue.
Or
right?
parental rights.
Or parental rights for that matter. I mean, I don't have to agree with someone to understand and respect their right, their fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children.
We are a nonpartisan organization. We don't screen their political party to be part of our organization. If they care about liberty, if they care about being a parent and their parental rights and their ability to guide the upbringing of their children, we welcome them.
Though the group calls itself nonpartisan, many of its members traveled to the Florida state capitol recently to show their support for Republican Governor Ron DeSantis over a new law that bans classroom instruction about sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through grade 3. What critics call the Don't Say Gay bill has been attacked by LGBTQ groups, the White House, and some large employers in the state, including Disney. Moms for Liberty says voices for parental rights in education need to be just as big.
Have parents dropped the ball a bit in terms of their engagement?
You know, and it's not to point fingers because we all are those parents, right? My kids lived in an A district. They brought A's home and everything looked fine. My son that's now in college brought home state test scores where he was in the top in 5, which is the top you can get in Florida in his civics class. And I was beaming with pride. Someone told me to look a little deeper into those scores, and it turned out he got about a 50% on that test.
Well, and I always like to say that the only thing that school systems do better than defend and protect themselves is celebrate themselves. So, you know, the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of celebration oftentimes in public education, but when you look at the heart of the matter to see if children are really learning in school and getting what they need to unfold their full potential, what we saw oftentimes is that is not happening.
Are the school boards stacked against parents in some ways?
Absolutely. What's happened all across the country is teachers' unions have gotten involved in these school board races for a long time now, and they work to get their candidates on the school board.
I would oftentimes sit in these bargaining sessions and say, the teachers' union is bargaining for the teachers, the district is bargaining for the district, the school board is now bargaining with the teachers' union. Who is bargaining for the parents? Where is the parents' voice being heard?
We say all the time, parents need to pull up a seat at the table because at that negotiating table, there's nobody representing parents and children at this time.
And we are going to turn this ship around. We are going to reclaim education in America.
So do the Moms for Liberty, those moms, set the agenda for all the chapters that they have elsewhere?
No, each district sets its own agenda based on what is most pressing there. Now, Deskovich and Justice do spend a considerable amount of time teaching moms how to understand how school boards work, how to read budgets, how to identify red flags. But basically their position is teachers, administrators, unions, they're all looking out for their interests, and they want parents to step up and advocate for their kids.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Lisa. Coming up, we'll have an update to our reporting on transgender athletes. An update on our reporting on men participating on women's sports teams as transgender athletes. Concerned Women for America has filed a Title IX complaint against the University of Pennsylvania for allowing a male swimmer, Leah Thomas, to participate on the women's team. The group says the future of women's sports is at risk and the equal rights of female athletes are being infringed. Thomas has broken women's records and recently captured first place in an NCAA 500-yard freestyle race. In 2020, we reported on a group of high school girls suing to keep boys from competing against them. Here's a short excerpt from that story. Chelsea Mitchell, the blonde with a red shirt in the middle, was positioned next to Terry Miller, orange top, blue shorts, who ran on the boys' team until about 3 years ago. Same with Andrea Yearwood. In 2018, months after both athletes switched over from the boys' team, they dominated the girls' state championships, placing first and second. Together, they've won 15 state championship races since 2017.
It's been very unfair for me and the other girl competitors to race against them. I personally lost 4 state championships, 2 All New England awards, and countless other opportunities because of it.
Since then, about a dozen states have passed laws banning males from participating on female sports teams. In Pennsylvania, where Thomas attends college, House lawmakers recently passed a similar bill. If the Senate follows suit, the governor has promised a veto. When we continue, we're off to Alaska for the fascinating backstory of one of the Coast Guard's oldest ships. Next week on Full Measure, we enter the mysterious and alluring world of sleep and dreams, so crucial to our waking lives in ways you may not realize. And now researchers are exploring lucid dreams.
Over time, you can learn to at least initially control your own body in the dream, so you can decide where you want to explore in the dream. And eventually you can start to have what's control of actual things in the environment. Like you can say, I want to go through a portal, and in the next room I want to be in like Paris or something like that.
The science of dream engineering and how we can use it to our benefit, next week on Full Measure. Now, a story from our travels to Alaska. Scott Thuman reports on a unique Coast Guard ship with a fascinating namesake.
A picturesque sunny day at Coast Guard Station Kodiak, Alaska, 250 miles south of Anchorage. Today's weather is deceptive, as this base is here precisely because for much of the year, icy storms lash Alaska and the rich fishing waters of the Bering Sea. And it's from here that help comes when ships are in distress. The fleet of modern planes and helicopters deploy in even the worst conditions, but when it comes to ships, the biggest asset here is one of the oldest in their fleet.
We have the buoys here and here.
Commander Brian Whistler is the cutter's commanding officer.
Cutter's seen a lot of action over the years, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. She is old, and she definitely takes a lot of time and maintenance for the crew to keep her running, but extremely capable platform. Excellent seakeeping ability and endurance, which is perfect for the missions in the Bering.
Perfect for these conditions means pretty slow and heavy, but also strong. They call her the bulldog of the Bering.
I would say operating in the Bering Sea is probably some of the toughest duty a Coast Guardsman can get. The weather is harsh and unforgiving, and it can be taxing at times.
What also struck us about this particular cutter is the fact that she's named after one of America's most famous authors, an African American who wrote one of the most important books of the 20th century.
Now, we are proud to present the triumph of an American family, Roots.
Roots, the story of Africans enslaved and brought to America, spent 46 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and spawned an ABC miniseries that was watched by 130 million people in 1977. It earned Haley a Pulitzer Prize. But what you might not know is that before all the literary acclaim, he was a proud member of the Coast Guard, enlisting in 1939 at age 17. He began as a lowly mess boy, but quickly gained a reputation for writing great articles and letters, even helping fellow crew members pen love notes home. And at a time when opportunities for black servicemen were still limited, the Coast Guard recognized his talent, putting him to work as a journalist and public affairs specialist.
You have the namesake after someone who not only kind of exposed a lot of the world to the injustices to the African American community, to the black community, but then rises to the level that a ship is named after him. What does that say to you?
It impresses me that a couple things. One, that the Coast Guard recognized the talent in him at that time, and frankly created a rate, and of which he became one of the first enlisted leaders of. I think that says a lot about the Coast Guard and its culture.
These days, when we're in such formative times, such sensitive and critical times in our social structure, do you feel like it's hard to ignore every time you get on here that there's something a little different, a little special about this vessel?
I think so. It's hard to miss that because frankly we wear it on our hats and on our uniforms, and we are Alex Haley sailors.
A namesake who always treasured his time at sea in the service of his nation, a tradition this old cutter still honors today. For Full Measure, I'm Scott Thuman in Alaska.
It's amazing what you find out when you ask a few questions. We'll see you next week, everybody. Thanks for watching.